All right, I just want to welcome everybody here to our 2 o'clock meeting. Each and every Friday we've been joining you here, and just want to welcome you and then get right into the discussion today. So I'm John Whitler, and I work with Ogallala Commons and manage our Grow Eco initiative here in Southeast Colorado. And so I'll be leading you through the call today, or chatting with the panelists. Let's go to the next slide. And want to make sure and thank all of these sponsors. Want to call out a couple in particular: the Colorado Sbdc. The folks at the Small Business Development Center have just been amazing over the last 6 weeks plus, helping small businesses deal with what's going on. And so we really appreciate their support for all of you, as well as for our communities. Also want to call out OEdit and Startup Colorado. Really appreciate all the support that we're getting for entrepreneurs as we go through this time. So anyway, if you get an opportunity to thank any of those folks, I encourage you to do so. The structure for our call today is going to be, first we're going to hear from Martine, and we'll hear about complex problems, wicked problems, and then we're going to move into a panel with some business development experts. And so first of all, though, before I bring Martine on, I just want to say I've really been anticipating this call. I had the opportunity to hear Martine several years ago, and the concept of wicked problems just really resonated with me, and the idea that our values and our priorities can try to compete with one another and create a tension is certainly something that we're seeing across not only our state but the nation and the world today. And it's something that we all have to navigate in our own communities, and even as small business owners and other organizations, we have to manage that same tension even at a hyper local level within our own organization. So really excited to hear Martine talk about that. And so I think without any further ado, if you want to move the next slide, and I want to go ahead and introduce Martine Carson. And Martine, you can just take it from here.
Yeah, thanks a lot, John, for the introduction. So my name is Martine Carson. I'm a communication studies professor at Colorado State University. To give you a little bit of background, basically for the last 20 years, my work is focused on how do we talk about tough issues, particularly the last 15 or so focused on local communities. I'll make the argument that we have lots of different kind of tough issues, and certainly COVID is at the top of the list these days. But one of our biggest problems right now is the inability to have the conversations that we need to have. So my work is working with local communities, cutting across public, private, nonprofit lines to build capacity and design processes to help people talk about these tough issues. And certainly having business leaders' voice heard in these broad community conversations is a critical part of this. We can't leave these conversations to the politicians or the media. We need in local communities to kind of come together. So about 13 years ago, I created the Center for Public Deliberation at CSU. It serves as an impartial resource specifically for the Northern Colorado community. I actually train undergraduate students as facilitators, and we run events, design and run events for the community, doing for the city, for community organizations, and those type of things to spark the kind of conversations that we're talking about today. A lot of my work is informed by research in social psychology and brain science, about how our brains work. That helps us understand why it's so hard to have tough conversations, and how easy it is for conversations to kind of slip into the polarization, the talking past each other, and what we're getting so much at the national level, and starting to see more and more with COVID, which is certainly kind of a dangerous spot we are with these communities that we need to be able to come together. So I'm going to spend these 10 minutes, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, talking about kind of one key tool or concept that we use a lot at the heart of the work that we do at the CPD, which is around the idea of wicked problems. Right? And there's a big literature on wicked problems. You got my email on the first slide, so I'm happy to share materials or additional videos if anyone's particularly interested in these concepts. Some people really look at wicked problems as a category, like a type of problem. I look at it more as a lens through which to see problems, right? So when you're dealing with an issue, when it's particularly difficult and really kind of polarizing and people talking past each other, what happens if you step back and you think, what happens if I look at this as a wicked problem? How does that change the framework? How does that change the conversation? How does that open up possibilities for us to talk to each other in a different way? So you see on the slide that the heart of wicked problems is they're defined by these competing underlying values that just don't fit together very well. And the best way to explain this is with an example. So if you go to the next slide, water in northern Colorado is a problem that we've worked with quite a bit. This slide is actually from a project about 7 years ago, working with the Community Foundation here in the CSU Water Institute. We build these, I call these wicked problem slides, as this tangible process of trying to identify kind of the underlying the values and interests on an issue and explicitly kind of putting them on the table to help people kind of see them in a particular way. So we built this through a lot of public engagement, surveys, and people filling out forms, just how they talked about water. And I try to capture on this slide with these are nine things that people really cared about. And it shows a wicked problem in a couple different ways. One is if you look at the boxes one at a time, these are all good things, right? The problem isn't bad people with bad values. The problem is no, we've got lots of different values. All these things are good in a way. But the second aspect of a wicked problem is, while they're each individually good, they don't fit together very well. There's natural tensions between them. Maybe not an automatic zero sum, but just a naturally doesn't fit together. So my argument is what we need to be doing in our communities is identifying those tensions and trying to work through them together, right? To figure out better ways of negotiating and dealing with those tensions. The problem is that's not the kind of conversations we have naturally. Because of our brains, because of the loudest voices out there, typically strategically frame issues in a very different way. They either want to pick one value and frame it as if I care about something important. So if you disagree with me, you're pushing back on something important, or they kind of strategically frame other people's motives in a negative light. So instead of talking about economic vitality, they frame it in terms of greed or not caring about anything about money, right? Those dominant frames make our brains happy. They're framing things in a very simple good versus evil way, but they make it really hard for us to have the conversations and come up with the collaborative actions that we need to deal with these problems better. So you can see on the slide, the kind of conversations we need to have are these prioritization conversations. How do we have a tough conversation to think about what at this time is most important around these, while also recognizing the trade-offs, while recognizing those that might not be as high on the list of priorities are still important, and how can we work together to kind of mitigate the impact on that. Or maybe it's a balancing conversation to look at how do we find the right kind of middle ground between these, or ideally it's a transcending conversation, which is working creatively and collaboratively to kind of create a win-win, to figure out ways that we can get beyond the tensions and kind of fix things. Unfortunately, we don't have those prioritization, balancing, transcending conversations if we have these easier conversations available to us. And again, the dominant voices, the loudest voices tend to frame things much easier way. So how do we set up the capacity in our communities to have these different conversations? So next slide. So I create a few different examples of wicked problems that we've kind of played with. I'll end on COVID to kind of start the process of thinking about how all these values are coming together with COVID. This is one we did up in Steamboat of looking at local food that we developed. Next slide. This is, healthcare in some ways is incredibly complex, but you can also look at it as we want those three things, but those three things don't fit together very well, right? But most conversations pick one or two at a time and frame them as if, people are denying something that's good. Next slide. I do a lot of work here at home with Fort Collins. The city of Fort Collins is a triple bottom line city. So every major policy goes through the lens of what's the impact on people, what's the impact on the economy, what's the impact on the environment. It recognizes it as a wicked problem, that each of those are good on its own, but they don't fit together very well, right? I like to show this slide in particular because it gives you the example of transcendence. The economy and the environment traditionally have been kind of at odds with each other, but something like green jobs transcends that tension. All of a sudden, we're creating jobs, we're creating wealth in a way that's good for the environment. So it took people that were typically opponents or enemies and made them collaborators, and that's kind of the heart of a lot of the work that we're trying to do. Next slide takes it even a little bit more abstractly, but to make the argument essentially that democracy is a wicked problem. This is the preamble of the Constitution. The next slide kind of shows that embedded in that statement are some kind of key big values. The next slide kind of translates those values into a little bit more modern terms. But you're going to see that here are 5 big American values: justice, security, equality, freedom. Again, taking them one at a time, they're universally supported, right? Everyone on this call prefers justice to injustice, right? But the reality is these values don't fit together very well. One exercise, the next slide shows one exercise I do in my classes and also in a lot of my presentations when I can pass out the clickers, is I ask people to rank these 5 values. And these are very typical results that all 5 get supported across the room if I ask people. And we use this to kind of make the point that in a lot of ways, we all have the same values, right? Values by definition are something that's good, but we differ in how we rank them. And then that really kind of does, one at the same time, establishes a lot of common ground and it also creates a lot of tension, right? But how do we kind of change the conversations to focus productively on that tension rather than kind of putting the blinders on and picking one value at a time and assuming people that disagree with you are denying a value? The next slide just shows the other question I ask is a little harder question of what's least important to you out of those 5. And again, I always get a broad range of answers with that. But the heart of it, with the next slide, the heart of it again is this process that goes against how our brains want to work, of identifying those tensions and putting them on the table. Next slide. So just with those 5 kind of American values, you see there's some inherent tensions in there. And this is important, that these are tensions that we're never going to resolve. Right? We'd be in a lot of trouble if ever any of these tensions at one side completely started dominating. You can think back to what answer you might have given to which is most important to you, those 5. You can probably also think about that one could also dominate too much, right? And you can see that, part of the concern now is certainly public health is at the top of the list in a lot of ways of dealing with COVID, but public health dominate too much. Can we just focus on that value and forget about the other values? So we always have to think about the values and tension. The bottom is just some other tensions inherently come out as we've been working in the community the last 13 years. But again, it's not a natural process to seek out and look at those tensions and bring them to the table. The natural process is to avoid them and to frame things strategically as if there is no tension. So go ahead and go to the next slide and then the next one. I'm running out of time here. So this is kind of an initial brainstorm about, okay, what would a wicked problem slide about COVID and our community response be? As we've been talking about, this is kind of both a public health crisis, it's a mental health crisis, certainly kind of a business and an economic crisis. But so much of the dominant messages tend to pick one of those things at a time and kind of use messages to rally the like-minded and also kind of dismiss or even ridicule people that disagree. But the kind of conversations we need to be creating in our community is to recognize a broad range of values that are relevant and start the hard work. Okay, how do we find the right way of negotiating those? Whether it's prioritization, whether it's balancing, or whether it's transcendent. So with that, I think I'll go ahead and pass it back to John, and he'll kind of walk through some of the other presentations.
All right. Thank you, Martine. I appreciate that. I think it is a very timely reminder that many of the values that we hold are complex or make a complex network that makes solving problems together difficult. But solving problems together is exactly what's going to help us emerge from this crisis better and stronger. And so we certainly appreciate the presentation today and encourage you to check out other pieces of Martine's work as well. So with that, we're going to move in. If you could bring the next slide, we're going to move into a panel with 3 different panelists today. We've got Glenn Plegans, who's the Director of Business Support and Rural Prosperity with OEdit, Clark Becker, the Director of Rural Workforce Consortium, and Mike O'Donnell, who is the Executive Director of Colorado Lending Source. So kind of how we're going to do this is just kind of have a conversation between the group of us. I'm going to ask each one of you to just go ahead and introduce yourself, and in 2 minutes or less, give us an idea of what your organization is doing, what the mission of your organization is, and what you're engaged in presently at the moment. So, and let's just go with the order that's on the screen. So Glenn, and then after that, Clark, you can just jump in, and Mike following that.
All right. Again, Glenn Plegans. I'm the Director of business support and rural prosperity for the Office of Economic Development. I have 4 programs underneath me: the Small Business Development Center Network, the Minority Business Office, the Employee Ownership Network, and Rural Opportunity or Rural Opportunity Representatives. Have a little bit different take the way we do things. I was an Sbdc director for 8 years, and I've been in this role, I guess it's been 1 year and 2 days now. And we have a lot going on with response to COVID, from the Colorado Sbdc.com website that's been stood up, turning a network into a virtual network within a week. We've consulted probably over 5,000 hours at this particular time in regard to COVID. And then our Minority Business Office has been working really diligently as well. We've stood up a hotline for kind of one-off questions and things of that nature, plus to connect to further resources and answer questions as they come down. The hotline number is actually 303-860-5881, which I'm sure the folks on this line or the folks on this call are aware of that. But we've just been doing a lot of different reacting to COVID and helping unpack the SBA programs, working with our lenders, working with our resources, and we'll continue to go, to do so as this crisis just keeps unfolding. And on to Mike.
Clark.
Go. Mike, are you gonna go ahead?
You go, Clark.
Or
All right.
Clark.
I'll chime in. I'm Clark Becker, and I get to be director of the Colorado Rural Workforce Consortium. I out of college, I 8 years as a high school teacher, football and basketball coach, and I was intrigued with Martine's comments. Is how we respond to things. I always said with my football players, when you fumble the ball, you got 2 options. You can throw your helmet on the ground and complain, or you can get out there and play defense. So we're kind of in a situation where we got to get out and keep playing the game. The consortium, just very quickly, we are one of the 10 federally recognized workforce areas in Colorado, and I only cover 51 of Colorado's 64 counties. We have 29 workforce center offices in 28 different counties. 4 of those are down in Southeast Colorado. Betty Valeska is my director covering that area out of La Junta, with Lamar and Walsenburg and Trinidad. So we are very busy. I do want to mention, just from a spirit of full disclosure here, that I'm very blessed with the life experiences I've had. I served in public government, if you will. For 17 years, I was the mayor of Woodland Park and the Teller County Commissioner. So I understand local government, but I've been in the economic development profession since 1993. Get to work with Mike over the years and enjoyed the last year plus with Glenn as well. A lot of people might wonder whether that means I can keep a job or not, but the bottom line is it has really been of value to me. What we're focused on in the consortium right now is frankly trying to help people wade through the unemployment insurance craziness that's going on out there. And our staff are just doing a great job. They're all working remote, which is a challenge for us, although we're very remote with the geography that we cover. But we're excited about being able to do that and getting into doing what we do, and that is connecting job seekers and businesses. Because I always say, if business isn't hiring, there's really nothing we can do to help a job seeker. So maybe that's enough introduction there, John, and we'll let Mike. Now there's a rural guy for sure, Mike. So it's on to you, buddy.
Thank you so much, Clark and Glenn. I'm Mike O'Donnell with Colorado Lending Source. And just by way of introduction, Colorado Lending Source is a private, nonprofit, and mission-based organization. Our mission is to foster the economic growth of diverse small businesses here in our communities. I live out on the Eastern Plains, so I've got a little bit of a prejudice about really working with people on the Eastern Plains, but Colorado Lending Source is a statewide organization. We do a lot with the Small Business Administration loan programs. At the present time, we're really focused on the Paycheck Protection Program and trying to help as many people access that program as we can. As a nonprofit lender, we don't have access to treasury or deposits like banks do, but we've been able, thanks to an initiative from OED, the state of Colorado this last weekend, access funding through foundations and banks to really provide more access to this program to small businesses all over the state who haven't been able to get access to it through the bank. And we can talk more about the Paycheck Protection Program. We're getting as many projects out as we can, but the program is actually available to small nonprofits. And a lot of people might have missed that, but even churches can apply for this program. So if you have a small church in a rural community that does have payroll, you can actually apply for an SBA loan to get that. And that's the first time ever in the history of the SBA that they've opened it up to religious organizations. And the key thing about the Paycheck Protection Program is that there's a forgivable component. And so it's possible to get all of your loan under that program potentially forgiven within 8 to 12 weeks. In addition to helping people with paycheck protection, and again, we're processing as many as we can, we've also created a couple of emergency funds. And one we've created specifically for the Eastern Plains is a small program where we make $10,000 loans to businesses. And it's sort of a cross between a paycheck protection loan and a disaster loan, an EIDL loan. It's a 3% loan. It's over 2 years, no payments for the first 6 months. Relatively easy to get because we're not a bank. And so we're really just trying to help people survive through this process of the crisis so that we can start really focusing on recovery. And we have also been working with many, many communities across the state to help them create, local loan funds to help their businesses. Not as many of them in the rural community, especially the Eastern Plains. So we're trying to fill a little bit of a gap to provide some funding there as well. But we are a lender, a nonprofit lender, but also mostly an educator. And you wouldn't believe how many questions I answer about the Paycheck Protection Program on a daily basis from all over the country. So that's something that unfortunately I know more about than I want to. But we are probably 3 days, 4 days away from running out of funds on Paycheck Protection version 2. And Congress is already working on perhaps CARES Act version 3. And I know there's some discussions I've got scheduled on Monday with some people in DC about that. So with that, I'll hand it back to the wonderful team, and I'll be here in the background should anyone need me.
All right. Well, I want to actually stay with you for a second, Mike, and just ask you, while we're talking about the payroll protection program, and it's been, I know that it's available to farmers now as well. You were mentioning small churches and nonprofits. And so just wanted to double check the Schedule H. I know for someone who's using a Schedule C when they're an independent contractor, but for a farmer, is that could you maybe elaborate on that just a bit, if there's anything that would be helpful for?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I apologize for not mentioning that, but agricultural producers, farmers and ranchers are eligible for the Paycheck Protection Loan, and it is based, as you say, on a Schedule H, because farmers don't do Schedule Cs. For the Schedule Cs, for those of you who are sole proprietors, it's truly only based on your line 31, your net income number. And I don't know what the relevant line is on the Schedule H, but it would be the similar sort of concept. And the way it works is that you have to be less than 500 employees, which may not be hard on the Eastern Plains, and you must have revenue standards that fit below $1 million a year, which might be a little more challenging, which then allows us to look at something called the size standard for SBA, but we can explore that later. And again, the process is you take whatever your net income number is, you divide by 12, multiply by 2.5, and that gives you an idea of if it's just you, what you can then apply for under the Paycheck Protection Program. And because of the forgivable component, everyone should be looking to maximize their opportunities to access that program.
Excellent. I'm going to go back to Glenn next here, and just part of the lens that we're talking about today is really how we as small business owners can lead our communities and lead our organizations through this time. And so I'm wondering if you might reflect a little bit on what you've seen over the years as maybe we hear a lot about what the strengths of rural communities are, but I want to maybe go one step closer to that, and particularly as you see the environment that we're in, the situation that we're in, what would you maybe point out as a couple of the real strengths and assets that are available in rural communities and possessed by rural entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think the rural communities tend to just gravitate and come together better under crisis. Basically, there's not as much anonymity with the business owners. They know each other. The community knows the business owners. And I see that as a strength going forward, because it's going to be that community support when those businesses are, as those businesses are starting to open back up, that really gets them back to this new normal, or back to where they're, making sales again, and being a successful business owner. I was a business owner for 23 years, and after 9/11, I experienced a huge downturn in my company, had to go through quite a different few processes, and with the banks, with my lending institutions. Also in 2008, ended up in workout with a bank. What's really nice about, or I can't say nice, but what the reality is about this is the fact that there are a lot of resources out there, and business owners and communities really need to work with Colorado Lending Source and the Sbdcs and the SBA going forward, because as a business owner, you do have resources. It's just a matter of digging deep, getting them to mesh together. If you need to understand them, the Small Business Development Center network is there. Their consultants are standing by. They're free. They can help work through these, work through this entire situation with you. Everybody on my team and within the Sbdc network, we're working just super hard to stand up resources and to make sure that we've got what it takes as a state, and combining with other, organizations to really respond to this. Mike said, he's on a call with Monday with, with DC. Basically, we're advocating for some of the things going forward so that we can really make it through this thing. But at the same time, I see the rural communities really powerful, just because of the fact that they tend to glue together a little bit quicker than, Front Range or urban communities.
Clark, I'm wondering that was, if you've got, using that lens of personal experience that we just got even from Glenn, and maybe kind of meshing those two questions together. So, what's a strength that rural communities have, that rural entrepreneurs have, and maybe just give us a personal lens that you've either seen that or experienced that, and how you see that working out into the future. How could we take advantage of that?
You bet. And I tell you what, Glenn touched on, I think resilience is the word that comes to my mind in rural Colorado. But what I find is rural Colorado isn't going to wait around for government to come in and fix it. Now, not to say we don't want to have that help and all those resources, but what do we need to do to get after it right now? And from a personal standpoint, I shared with Delaney a little bit recently. In my days as a Teller County Commissioner, I was also the director of the Teller County Economic Development Council. So not only was I had two jobs, but working in both of those, but I was there at the time of the Hayman fire. Some of you have been around Colorado a while. Remember that was a little fire that was about 138,000 acres, burned 25% of our county. So working with that and wearing those two hats and trying to move through the emergency management of that process was a real powerful experience. And frankly, it's the resilience of our smaller businesses. And one of the big things that I feel an obligation to do is to be that advocate for rural Colorado, because I fear that the global economy of the 21st century puts so many of our rural communities at great risk. Because technology, you and I were talking beginning about the importance of broadband and the opportunities that are there. But if we can't get connected, that adds a whole additional degree of difficulty. And I think sometimes I say this with some tongue in cheek, but the good news about Colorado is we're a very locally controlled independent state. And the bad news is we're a very locally controlled independent state. And I intend that to be a little bit tongue in cheek, but the reality is there's times when that local control, and don't get me wrong, I'm a very local control guy as a former county commissioner and local elected official. But sometimes, and I think Southeast Colorado is a tremendous example, and I use it all the time, of collaboration among your 6, and in my case, 8 counties, including Los Animas and Huerfano County in our Southeast sub area down there. You guys just do a terrific job. And that is the only and the best way for our rural communities to succeed. And that is collaborating and working together.
Great. Now, going to ask the same question really to all three of you, ask you all to respond to this. And that is we've kind of moved out of a place where it seems like all of the information is changing on a minute by minute basis. And we've kind of moved to this really slow pace of week by week basis, right? And so I'm wondering, as we kind of move into that recovery time frame, if you talk about how your efforts, like in recovery, Clark, you just mentioned advocacy and policy has come up a couple of different times, and then of course funding is something that we've talked a great deal about, and how do we move along out of something where we're just talking about simply disaster funding and moving into more of a recovery time? And how does the policy work that you guys, your organizations are doing, how does that support recovery efforts that are going on the ground in different communities? How does funding continue to play into that? And at what point do we start talking about, maybe even something else that I haven't wrapped into that? So, and let's just have you start with that, Mike, if you don't mind.
Really, really good question. And it's really, for recovery is going to look different in different parts of the state, as it sort of always does, unfortunately. But to echo, the points that both Glenn and Clark made, essentially, Colorado is an amazingly collaborative state. I would suggest more so than any states on the east or the west coast. A lot of resilience there, but there'll also be, quite a bit of pain through this process. So we need to try and help the businesses that really wish to continue, in the communities that are really tapped into trying to work with them. I've had several conversations today with different communities, one on the western slope and one on the southern part of the Front Range, to try and work with them on how they can create some recovery type funding. But what I've seen, which I've not seen before in my 20 years here at Colorado Lending Source, is in the last week, I've seen so many foundations actually step up to provide funding to nonprofit lenders to help us make paycheck protection loans, recognizing that some of the bigger banks who pretty much dominated this program the first round weren't really accessing the people who that program was intended to help. So just off the top of my head, I know of more than about $30 million that different foundations in the state who are based in this state have been able to make available to nonprofit lenders, including ourselves. And we're not your typical micro lender in the state, but we do a lot of loans that the others won't do. So that's actually made a huge difference in terms of who's been able to access the program. And again, this is just getting them through till things start to mostly reopen again. But it's going to be different in different communities. In the mountain community I was speaking with earlier, they're not planning on opening their hotels until Labor Day weekend, and their big period as a resort is in the summer and not the winter. So essentially, they're going to be much more impacted than other communities we might work with. And so they need something a little different from what we might need here in Denver or in Colorado Springs or Fort Collins, or what I might need out, or we might need out in the little town where I live next to, which has 70 people and seems to be doing very well. Thank you very much. So it's really very, very different. So I'm not sure I completely addressed your question, but I'm really excited for the future. There will be differences. There will be opportunities that come out of the challenges. We will see, different ways of doing business, which will linger. And we really just got to have people be the entrepreneurs that they are and let them, address those issues and challenge them. One thing that this COVID is going to actually accelerate is the bigger businesses getting bigger. And so that's just going to be a challenge, which is more of a national discussion, later on, and what we do or how we respond or what entrepreneurial responses we have. But it's really sad times we're going through, but in some respects, there's exciting things ahead for those who do have that resiliency and are willing to help themselves wait it out and have people like us work with them if we can.
Excellent. Glenn, you want to kind of take a crack at that? So just kind of the recovery work, how that dovetails with policy and advocacy work that you guys have been doing, and then what you're seeing in funding or other areas as well.
Let's get off mute. Just kind of to continue what I mentioned before is the fact that, in 2008, when, my company went through this, the support mechanisms that are being stood up right now are just way different, right? And, our organizations, all three of us on this panel are advocating, at the state and federal level, we're being asked questions and we're advocating for the continuance of that, taking a look at different programs that we're going to need on an ongoing basis, because the reality is that if you lose, a quarter of cash flow because you had to totally shut down, even when you get back to the new normal or back to normal, if you're at 100% capacity, what does it take to manage that debt load on top of, your normal business operations, plus having lost that quarter? So you've got to really concentrate right now on, understanding and knowing your business model, really trying to figure out exactly how that business model is going to pivot or change, what your new normal value proposition is going to be. Is it going to be the same thing that you did before, or is it going to be modified? And, really digging down and digging deep for resources as you look at, maybe when I'm done with this, I'm at 80% of what I used to be for a year. Plus I lost 3 months. What does that do to my cash flow? And if you don't understand your cash flow, there's Sbdc resources and things of that nature that can help you answer those questions. One of the things I do want to say, though, is, the business that I ran for about 20 years, it was actually started in 1974. I was at the helm from 1991 till 2010, and now it's still going. And obviously, this is going to be a crisis it has to overcome. I'm, in touch with the owner, actually helping out with that. They received PPP funding. But at the same time, I think the bigger story is that was 12 years ago and we got through it. And this is something that, the business owners right now, you've got a lot of support. We're here. Use us, right? Use the support, network with your friends. I on a daily basis right now, and I'm talking to small business development center directors and business owners and resource partners. And sometimes you go along a path and there's not an answer, and then there's 3 in one day. So just keep digging deep to get your businesses supported and going forward. And please use your resources, public, private, whatever it takes. And then realize too that, I know right now, John, you said it's kind of like we're in a little bit of a lull period right now. And, I've heard that described in the past couple of weeks, but that's not going to last much longer. So you've really got to start to think about what it's going to be to manage this business going forward, and holding on to cash so you can get to that paradigm. But at the same time, just realize that this is going to pass and that you're going to come back and you're going to have a new normal, but you're going to be able to manage that, and you're going to be able to get the help to get to that point.
Excellent. All right, and Clark, we got about two minutes or so for you to tackle the same one. So go for it.
Yeah, a couple of things that jumped out at me, and with Mike and Glenn's comments. Mike, the access to capital is so critical to our small businesses, and I know the great work that Mike in Colorado Lending Source does, and so helping people with that. But also, when you talk about advocacy in most of our truly rural communities, if you've got 25 employees, you're a major employer. That's significant. And our second stage companies are typically defined as 99 employees or fewer, and trying to help those companies succeed. I think that's where the greatest opportunity exists in our truly rural areas, is those small entrepreneurs and businesses. I tell the story a lot, and for years, and I think it'll hit home here. I think in Southeast Colorado, those of you that have been around a while remember when Neoplan in Lamar shut down, and I think there was 350 jobs that were lost just like that. And I got to thinking about that and what was the impact of those lost jobs in Prowers County and how it might relate to the greater Denver area, and doing a very simple mathematical calculation. And more than one person has picked up on that theme. But those 350 jobs in Lamar were comparable to the greater Denver area at the time, losing 46,000 jobs. So part of what my job is, Glenn's job is, I know, and Mike, I know you're a champion of this as well, is to make sure we tell that story so that they know what these impacts are to our rural communities, and that the solutions don't have to be billions of dollars to help them recover and move this needle forward. So that would be, maybe I stayed within your 2 minutes there, John. So hopefully we're there.
Hey, that was great. Excellent. So just kind of to recap what all three of you brought up resilience, either very specifically calling it out or different elements of resilience. And I think one of the things that's really important to note in that is that, resilient people, resilient companies, resilient communities have the ability to build alliances. That's a real strength of the rural community that was called out from the very beginning. Adaptive skills are a part of that. That's certainly something that culturally is very Colorado, very rural Colorado. Certainly our communities are very good at adapting, and that's kind of the pioneer spirit. And then as well, agency, right? The ability to have an impact on our own future. And Clark had called that one out too, not just waiting around for someone else to solve that problem, but those three things are, the main elements of resiliency. So I think that's a great opportunity for all of us. And if we could go ahead and advance to the next slide, I want to make sure that everybody knows how they can get the presentation from today and access the recording. We will be emailing out follow-up as well, so that will be available to everyone. But these links, you can access the presentation, recording, and a myriad of other resources, including those that were talked about today. And then let's go to the next slide as well. So if there is any other questions that you have, we certainly try to get to everything that comes up in the question and answer, but as well, feel free to reach out via email. And when if you go over to the YouTube channel, the Choose Colorado YouTube channel, the previous calls are there as well. As well as being able to access the information from the other three calls going on around the state every Friday. So there's a little bit of different information on each of those, and certainly encourage all of you to check that out. And with that, I think the next slide is just the end. So we really thank you. I thank each one of you on our panel today, and Martine for joining us. And we'll look forward to being back here again next week and taking a look at even more resources and how we support each other and our communities getting through the next several months as we get out of this. So anyway, thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
You bet.
All
Thanks.
right.
Good luck,
Well,
everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Thanks, Clark.